Hello, my fellow movie fans, and welcome to another show of Feast of Films Theatre. Today, starring Matthew Black and Ethan R. Hill. There, that's the intro.
Oh, yeah. Classic. Classic.
Hello, my fellow movie fans. Welcome to another episode of A Feast of Films. I'm Ethan R. Hill, and with me, as always, is...
Matt Black, what's going on, my fellow movie fans?
How's your week been, Matt? How are you doing?
Not too bad. No complaints. Very, very busy. Watched Hamilton last night, though, on
How was
Disney
that?
Plus. It was actually really good. Like, the musical's really great, and I heard it was really great, so it was really great to see a really great musical that was great. But listen, the camera work on that thing was incredibly impressive. I was a little bit concerned because they did is recorded like the live stage play,
Yeah.
right? Like that's all it was. It wasn't like a movie version. It was just a recording of the live stage play. And the camera work on there, like the shots, I was more than impressed. It is way better than I thought it was ever going to be. So not only was the musical great, the camera work was wonderful, which, me and you were like, yeah, camera work. My wife
Yeah.
didn't care, but I was pretty excited about it.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. That's a fair thing to be excited about.
It was good though. It was good.
That's good. I, for some reason, I don't get it. I don't understand the hype behind it. Like, I liked it well enough because I watched it, but, everyone talks about how amazing it is, and I watch it, and I love hip-hop, I love
Yeah.
history, and I love musicals.
So it should have worked for
It
you.
should have worked for me, but I watched it and I was just kind of like, okay, it's good, but it's not like everyone telling me how amazing it has been for the last however many years it's been on Broadway. Like there's because I've just been hearing about it nonstop, and then I watched it. I'm like, this is a musical. Okay, all right, all right, but
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. It worked for me.
mm,
And at the end of the day, like
well,
for
and,
me, it's the tragedy of it all, right? Like that's the story, that's the heart. Like you see this guy just like Icarus. They even said in the musical, he's like Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm like, how many stories do we have where people do so many great things and they're amazing and they have this awesome ascendance only to just like fall and
well, and,
into like tragic devastation, which is kind of what it was.
I think I liked the story, and I didn't hate the musical numbers. Again, I don't know what it is because I didn't dislike it. It's not like I was sitting there going like, "This is dumb, this is stupid." No, it was literally just me being like, "Oh, it just didn't tickle me." I have no idea why. It just
I
didn't.
think it's just an expectation problem, like a marketing problem. And I'm not necessarily saying it's your fault, but like sometimes people like hype us up on things for so much for so long when we actually watch it.
Yeah,
It is a little disappointing. I get that.
yeah, and it's not again. I didn't like. That's the weird thing is I didn't come out disappointed. I just came out being like, I don't think I understand this. Like, and I understand the story. I followed along. I knew what happened. I understood what they were saying in the music. Like I understood it
Yeah.
all. But there's a disconnect where it's just like I didn't feel that I didn't it didn't elicit the same emotion for me as it did for a lot of other people, and I have no idea why. But I'm not going to take it away from anybody and tell them that they can't like it because that would be wrong. That would be very wrong of me.
That'd be very wrong. It would.
Also, I'm
The king
not
was
gonna.
great though, right? The king was great.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's a very small role, but great. Just fantastic.
Well, and I'm never going to take away the accomplishments that Lin Manuel Miranda did, like creating that and then starring in it and all that kind of stuff. Like the dude's talented. I will never ever
E-
remotely try and take anything away from him.
even just like writing all that, man, like
Yep.
insane. Like just how quick that story moves. Like it moves at a very quick pace. Like you got to keep up with it because like one minute you're here, the next minute you're like, oh, it's been like 5 years or something. You know what I mean? Like things happen quick on stage in the story, and like how they had like the spinning floor
Yep.
was
Their evolve was
so
really really
cool.
great.
Yeah, that was super slick. So there's just a lot of things that were great, but yeah, like how he wrote it and produced it, and again, starred in it, wrote all the music, the lyrics, like it was just amazing. Like the fact that he did that, it was just, it's crazy. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
bang up job, bang up job.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad that you got to see it and have some positivity in your life.
Yeah, it was good. The end kind of made me sad, but it was good.
I mean, like, yeah, I don't think it's a happy ending though. I think it's a
Definitely
tragedy.
not. I asked my wife, I was like, come on, why can't there be any happy endings to all these movies we've been watching for the last little while? Like, what is going on?
Because life doesn't have a happy ending, Matt.
Yeah, that's pretty much the truth of it. I'll just go watch some Star Wars. At least there's happy endings in those movies.
At least for the
Except, I guess, episode 3 and the whole of episode 2, but, whatever.
well, I guess episode 5 isn't exactly a happy ending either.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. You're right. Okay, never mind. I'm done.
We got
That's it.
one.
I'm just going to watch Return of the
4
Jedi.
I was gonna say 1, 4, 6, and like maybe 7. Is 7 a happy ending? Happy-ish.
Kinda. It's like bittersweet.
And like
They didn't blow up, but Han Solo got stabbed, so.
and like by the time that 9 rolls around, like so much has happened, you don't even know if like do I feel happy? Do I feel sad? What do I feel right now? What
I feel lost. That's what happens. It should have been the Lost Jedi.
Exactly.
That's that one right there.
New title, Lost Jedi. It's just
man.
2 hours of Luke going like, "Where am I? Which planet is this now?"
I can't keep up with all these people. What's going on? What's going on? Cheers, buddy.
Yeah. We're doing another recording late at night because we hate ourselves and have lives and responsibilities during the daytime now.
Back to the world.
Mild-mannered workers by day, podcasters by night.
But only on one night.
Only on one night for recording. The rest for editing and prep. But we have someone for that now, so less work for us.
Yeah. We're real professionals, guys.
Yeah,
We're
definitely.
real professionals here.
The most professional.
Minus the money part.
I mean, yeah, I don't have money. I don't have money. I don't think you have money.
I never have money.
So you can find a link to our Patreon down below. We don't have a Patreon. We don't have links to anything like that.
Oh man, classic.
You could just e-transfer me.
Classic.
So Matt, what do you want to talk about tonight?
You know what I want to talk about tonight?
What do you want to
Something
talk about?
that's really dear and near to my heart. Scooby-Doo. I want to talk about Scooby-Doo.
Well, how about we don't talk about Scooby-Doo and instead we talk about adaptations?
You know what? Actually, that's a better idea. You're right. Correct.
Did you know
Scooby-Doo he's wonderful, but the new movie was terrible. So
Did you know
yeah,
Scooby-Doo is
adaptations.
not an adaptation?
I did not.
Yes, it is not one. It's a cartoon. I guess. Okay, never mind. I just lied because technically, like the movie Scooby-Doo's is an adaptation.
Is an
of
adaptation,
the cartoon.
which
Yeah.
is what I was talking about.
So I guess first things first, though. What makes an adaptation?
Good question.
What are the parameters to you that make an adaptation of, makes a film an adaptation of something?
What is an adaptation? Is the question on everybody's mind. Yeah, no, for me, it's a reimagining of something at the end of the day, right? Often in a different medium or a different style. If you have a story like Lord of the Rings films are an adaptation from the book.
Yeah.
So similar story, right? But one is a version in a different medium. So usually the medium barrier is kind of the difference. In the case of like Scooby-Doo, we're talking about TV show cartoon to a movie.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly the same, but there's definitely considerable differences between them.
Well, and you're also talking about animated to live action, right? Or like
that's correct.
And then for the newest one,
even
it's
the
like-
new animated one, it's a different animation style, right?
yeah.
So in itself, yes, it is an adaptation of what's come before. But generally, at the end of the day, it's a reimagining of something. That's what I consider an adaptation, and often it crosses the boundary of a different medium.
See, I think you hit the nail on the head though with the different medium thing, because to me, you can reimagine a movie into another movie, but if you redo a movie, you're just remaking it or rebooting it, right?
Yeah.
So to me, an adaptation I think does have to cross a medium of some kind, whether it's because if it's a live action adaptation, because that's what they call that if they go from like a cartoon movie, like say they wanted to do Yeah, the live action adaptation of Lion King. As
Right.
pointless as it was technically live action. It was in a new medium of sorts, but it was still a different adaptation of it.
Right. And
To
it was still like, and that's why I say it doesn't always cross that medium, like whether you go to cartoon to live action, I guess, but they're still films in general, right? Like, so I consider that like filmmaking a medium, but yes, animation to live action can be differences. Like, it is a lot of like up in the air, but
yeah,
yeah, to
because
me,
I
I
guess
think it's just that whole reimagining. But I think a reboot's a little bit
a reboot's kind of like you're
different.
restarting the franchise. You're like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's more of a franchise thing, and it is an individual movie thing. But like,
Exactly. Yeah.
so going back to Lion King though, with you specifically, because you've seen them both, and you've already voiced your opinions in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Would you consider that an adaptation or a remake? Like, where would that fall for you on that spectrum?
Well, I would probably consider that a remake at the end of the day because they pretty much did it shot for shot, right?
Yeah,
Um,
because I guess
yeah, you're kind of see, the Lion King's a little bit tricky because while it is a very real, picturesque, realistic kind of looking creation and film they made, it's still animated. At the end of the
yeah,
day, they're both animations. It's just different styles of animations. So maybe some consider it a reboot, um, but I don't think so because they're not really restarting the series. They're just making kind of like a one-off movie. I guess maybe they could restart the series. You never know what they decide to do with
a
it.
live action Lion King 1.5. I don't think I'm prepared for that
Like,
mentally.
God, that would be interesting. That would be interesting. I might watch that. Timon and Pumbaa were okay. They were pretty funny. They were. Seth Rogen was better than I thought he was. Anyway, at the end of the day, for me, it's probably a remake, which a remake in itself could also be an adaptation of something. But
But like,
I
does that
think,
also? You think that translates to the other live action Disney movies as well? Because like, I know I want to talk in depth about just all those at some point, but like to me,
right,
I would still consider those remakes over adaptations, even though they do change the source material. They do change a bit from the source material as well as from. But I mean, the animated cartoons are technically adaptations to begin with for a lot of them because they are
yeah, a
adapted
lot of
from.
them, yeah, from like original source material, whether it's fairy tales or
Yeah,
a little bit of Shakespeare in there too, right? So there's definitely some or old, folk tales. But yeah, they're definitely adaptations on their own, different on their own, right? I would consider Lion King probably remake more than an adaptation because it stuck so closely to what came before, like almost literally shot for shot, minus a couple different things. When you're talking about Jungle Book, for example, I would say that's probably more of an adaptation because while it does have the same soul and spirit as the original Jungle Book, it is a very different story.
no, I could see that. I honestly had trouble getting through Jungle Book. I don't know why. Something with it just didn't land for me. So it's like I can't comment on, and I honestly don't remember a lot of the original one either. So I have a bit of trouble like comparing the two in my
That's
brain.
fair.
Whereas then if you look at like the other newer ones like Beauty and the Beast, that one's like pretty much also a one for one retelling of the '90s cartoon.
Yeah.
But then
Well,
when
I
you
guess I
go,
shouldn't say it's a completely different story, but like it's different enough that it's not like, wow, this looks exactly shot for shot like the original.
yeah.
It is more of an adaptation to a just straight remake.
Whereas if you go with even going back to like when they started this whole live action thing, the Alice in Wonderland was such a departure from that cartoon, that original.
Right.
Like that was like them trying to go back to the book for the source material. It was just such a weird experience because I was going in expecting to basically expecting to get what we got now that we all complain about with like the Disney remakes being too close to the original source material. But I
Right.
expected that going into the Alice in Wonderland movies, and then that's just never been a thing. Say like because it was so different, right? But like at the core, do you feel like the better adaptations come from adopting different media rather than just trying to adopt previously done movies?
Oh, 100%. I think it just gives you way more options and way more flexibility to create something different. Let's see. I just Googled adaptations because we have the internet, so why don't we use that just to like set a base kind of level of what, the definition of adaptation is.
I guess there is an Oscar category for best adapted screenplay. So I guess maybe if we're talking about
And
movies.
that's kind of where it works, right? So this is the definition for that. A movie, television drama, or stage play that has been adapted from a written work, typically a novel. So basically, like I said, when you talk about crossing mediums, so technically, would Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, those other ones be adaptations? Technically not, because it seems that the actual definition is specifically from a different medium.
But and like their definition to me kind of seems a bit shallow because like to me I think that really dismisses video game adaptations and like I'm trying to think of other mediums that you can adapt, but like I mean
Yeah, no, 100%. But yeah, like that definition definitely was like, yeah, I agree with you when you say shallow. But I think it's the idea of crossing mediums
yeah, I
more
think
than more than so like making a movie about another movie, because then I guess you're right. That could be considered more of a remake or a reboot, depending on the franchise, depending on what film we're talking about here.
so like to you at the core of it, what makes a good adaptation or what makes a bad adaptation? Like what has to be present in order for an adaptation to be good or bad?
For me, it's a little similar to my answer to the first one when you're talking about what is an adaptation. At the end of the day, for me, what makes a good adaptation good is if you carry over the soul of it.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, right? Like when you're talking about books to films, you can't take everything that's in a book and put it onto a film. It just wouldn't work. That would be way too long. And not to mention they're two different mediums, so you consume them very differently. Right? Like you consume a comic book very differently than an MCU movie. You consume a video game very different from a video game adaptation film. So the adaptation, while it necessarily can't have every single thing in there, it has to have the soul. That's what has to transfer. If you can't find the soul, that's a problem. Like that's a problem. Like we talked about Fan Stick, right?
Yeah.
Well, at the beginning it was like, oh, this isn't a terrible movie. It's kind of like science horror thing going on, and then it just totally fell off the rails completely after that. But at its soul, is Fantastic Four that type of
It
property? Like, is that the
100%
characters?
it's got some sci-fi to it, but I wouldn't really say like there are glimpses of horror in it, but it's never like overt horror. It's not like body horror and disgusting. It's more of just like, oh, like
Exactly.
if I was in this situation, I'd be kind of disturbed. Like,
Exactly. So like for me, like the best adaptations is creating something unique to itself. Like I get it, everyone has to create their own thing, especially when you're talking about film. Every director has their vision and their idea what they want to do,
yeah,
but they have to bring that soul with them. If they don't have the soul, if they don't have the soul, baby, if they don't have that soul of the property, then you're already in trouble. And then also you got to respect kind of the history of that property as well and try and introduce those type of elements, but still make it available for what medium you're working in. Like cuz that's ultimately, and that's honestly one of the hardest things, right? To shift mediums. Maybe you have a story already. Maybe you have the story in a novel or in a book, but then to change mediums and have to tell that story in a completely different way is an incredible challenge. And
one
even
it's
Taika Waititi, even Jojo Rabbit was an adaptation
yeah.
from a small, like a kid's book that his mom used to read him. So
One it's again, it's also I think realizing too that like there's some things that aren't going to translate from book to screen.
yeah, exactly.
There are
That's
some
it.
things that aren't going to translate from. Well, I mean, look at video game adaptations in general. Like, how many successful video game adaptations have there been?
Like recently, just Sonic. Like honestly, most of them are terrible, and I never saw Sonic, so I can't say if it was like really good or not. But
We've heard
people
good
said
things.
it was good. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't super great, but it was good. So that's a good first step for video game movies.
Well, I heard Rampage was fun, and that's a video game adaptation. And I've heard Tomb Raider was pretty good.
I never saw that one either.
Like, we're
The
not talking
trailer's kind of like,
we're not talking the original one. We're talking
yeah,
the
no,
new one,
no,
right?
you're talking about the newer one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like and like as someone who's never played the game though either, I don't really have much of a weight in that. The one I'm actually like curious about and like worried about so far is Uncharted
Mm-hmm.
because there are pictures surfacing now where Tom Holland is Nathan Drake and has a mustache.
Ooh, like a little
And
like teeny mustache.
like yeah, no, it's just it's a mustache. It's like a full. I'm very confused because like that wasn't really Nathan Drake's thing, but
It could be a disguise too. We don't really
like
know the
maybe, but
context of it.
disguises have never really been his thing. Like as someone who's played all four games, like I love those games. I'm very curious, and I will go in with an open mind. I will go in
Yeah.
hoping to like it. I'm very skeptical, but that's also the amount of like studio time that it's like that's gone into this. Because how long ago was this first one supposed to be made? Like
Oh, this has been a project that's been going on for
I want to say
years
pre the
and
fourth one coming
years.
out,
Like
right?
it's literally gone through like 6 or 7 directors. Like, and Mark Wahlberg was originally supposed to be Nathan Drake. Now he's Sully.
Sully.
That's how long we're talking about
Which
right now.
again, I'm also confused by that choice because like that doesn't make any sense to me. But like,
But there's supposed to be younger versions of the characters, so then that's okay. They should fit into those roles just fine, for the
one,
most part. And here's the thing: at the end of the day, they're both very talented and really good actors.
oh yeah,
So you're bringing in the talent, which is a number one good sign.
I'm not worried
Like
about
right off the
them at the
bat,
end of
that's
the
a good
day.
sign.
Like I'm not
But
worried.
then again, Prince of Persia also had Jake Gyllenhaal and Ben Kingsley, so
Honestly, man, honestly, just since we're talking about it, Prince of Persia, I didn't dislike until the end.
it was
Prince of
so
Persia,
like rough.
as someone who only I played one of the games, I wasn't really invested in it, but like I watched the movie and I'm like, you know what, this is fun. And then I got to the end, and it's like, and none of it happened, and no one remembers but you, and maybe the girl that you built this relationship with. And I'm like, hold on. So the last hour and a half of my life meant
It's
nothing.
nothing.
I don't like that. I really don't
That's
like that.
that.
That's
But to be fair, I'm pretty sure that's the first game. I'm pretty sure I played them a long time, like because they were original Xbox ones. Like we're
yeah.
talking like early 2000s, right? So I haven't played them for a long time, and they haven't been backwards compatible, so you can't even play them, which sucks because they were actually really fun games. But I'm pretty sure that's from the first one.
Okay.
I am like 98.9% sure that you go through the whole game, and in the end you just reverse to kind of like where everything started going down and end up changing one thing. So like none of it really happens in the end.
That's when I realized. That's the moment I
So
realized
yeah.
that I don't like movies and video games that do that. Like there's another one. They didn't go back in time, but it's like another movie called. It's not adaptation, but it fits in this conversation here. Daybreakers. Did you ever see Daybreakers or no?
I did not.
Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe. It's a vampire
No, I
movie.
didn't see that.
I
Okay.
really like it. However, they go on this entire journey, and then by the time they reach the end of the journey, they're basically back to the same point they were at the middle of the movie.
Oh,
And I don't
fun.
like that because, like, to me, that just all that progression in the third act meant nothing.
That's like Repo Man. Did you ever see
No,
that?
I didn't see Repo Man.
With Forrest Whitaker and Jude Law. Okay,
No,
I'll spoil it for you. It does exactly the same bullshit. It's
where
like
it's
you
like,
get to the end and you're like, oh wait, none of this actually really happened.
and
So
it's again,
it's
it's as soon as
like
you
right back to
realize
the middle, somewhere in there.
one, it's the thing is your journey is supposed to move you forward, but then as soon as you get to a point where you haven't gone anywhere, it bugs me. It just bugs me. And Prince of Persia is the one that pointed that out to me. Like, oh,
I don't like that.
I want to see my character succeed.
Yeah. And to be fair, yes, that was I am again very sure that's exactly the plot of the first one. It didn't play out exactly in the film as it does in the first game, obviously, because the game was however many hours long. Movies are only so long. But yeah, I'm pretty
Maybe
sure that was a plot point. So to be
it
fair, that was a Prince of Persia thing.
it could be maybe it felt more rewarding in the game though because you spent so much time playing it, right?
I honestly can't remember. It's been a long time. Like that might have even been the goal to be able to go back, but I don't think so. But
Well,
it opened the way for a really great narrative going into like the next two games because you effed with the timeline. Now there's like this demonic beast hunting you down. So like it gave way to the Warrior Within, which was a really great game, and then the Two Thrones, which was like really really cool because you had like the good prince, and then you would turn like evil and get all like spiky and stuff, and have like this crazy chain that like rip people in half. It was sick. That game was awesome, man. I really want to play Prince of Persia now.
You're welcome.
God damn it. I can't.
You'll find a way.
Those need to be backwards compatible because those games were great.
Next gen,
Anyway.
maybe?
Probably not.
I
But
know.
you don't usually add in things. Like, they are backwards compatible, but, like, if it hasn't been backwards compatible to this point, it's not going to start.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Most likely.
So, like, do you think length of a property, like length of books, length of video games, that kind of stuff, really determines the success of an adaptation as well? Or do you think that... Because to me, I think that plays a part. I think if it's a really long game or it's a really long book, adapting it into just one movie is never the right choice. But also gambling on getting a franchise is also not the
a
right
hard
choice.
call. Well, especially right now, like, especially if you're talking video games, right? Like, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. But then when you're talking about books, man, like, you got the original Lord of the Rings book, which, like, you're talking about Fellowship of the Ring. Like, how many hours is that? Like 13, 14, 15 hours to read?
But the way that like, the problem is we can't really count Lord of the Rings in that kind of comparison, because the way that those movies were made, that never happened before. And aside from The Hobbit, is probably never going to happen again. I would love it to, because anything I would love to adapt, I'd love to just sit down and just do it as one chunk.
Yeah.
But, like, that was the whole thing. Anytime Peter Jackson went and, like, tried to get it made, he went and pitched it to a studio. He's like, no, I want to make all three at once. And they're like, are you stupid? Are you dumb? And he's like, I know, it sounds crazy, but, like, I want to do this. And then, like, eventually he got told no so much, he eventually started trying to pitch it as, like, just doing two movies, and it's like, okay, we'll do the first one first, then we'll do the second one. And I think he went to New Line, and they're like, why don't we just do them all at once? He's like, wait, what?
Thank you,
No,
thank
exactly.
you.
And like, and that's that. As I said, like, it's such a Lord of the Rings works as an adaptation, and it depends on who you talk to. Because I've talked to some people who love the books who are not fans of the movies at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, we want. I think I was talking to my one friend who's massive fan of Tolkien. And she's like, the problem with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is the fans who went and saw Lord of the Rings are like, we're mad because we didn't get enough of what was in Lord of the Rings in Lord of the Rings. We want more. And then The Hobbit came out, and they're like, oh, so you wanted more for Lord of the Rings? Well, here's more for The Hobbit. And they're like, no, we didn't want more for The Hobbit.
We want more for Lord of the Rings. Yeah, damn it.
And, like, it's, again, that's the trick of adaptation, though, right? Because it's like
Well, you can't have everything. You just can't.
But then there are some times where you should have more than what you get. Like, even looking at the Harry Potter franchise, like, straight up, some of those, like, Goblet of Fire and Order of Phoenix should have been longer movies than what they were. But instead, they were whittled way down. They were, like, I think they're the two shortest movies in the franchise, but they're the two biggest books.
See, and yeah, and that's questionable at the end of the day. Like, I don't really. Number 5, I wasn't a fan of. Number 4, I was iffy on.
Number 4,
Again,
I can't stand.
I agree. I think it should have been longer. But that's the hardest part of adaptations, because here's the question: what do you keep in? What do you keep out? What do you adjust? What do you change to make the narrative flow, even if you're removing certain elements, right? Like,
Well,
and I think Lord of the Rings is a good example of that, just because, like, yes, they made them all one time, but regardless, he still had to choose what to keep in and keep out. And if you've never read the books, like, you're gonna be like, oh my god, these movies are amazing. And if you read the books, you're like, oh, they missed out some things. But you can't deny the fact that those films are amazing. Like, Return of the King is still the top most awards won at the Academy Awards.
that's because they got all
For
the
its
awards
film.
for the Fellowship and Two Towers as well. Because if you look at it, Two Towers and Fellowship got no awards, and they just kind of threw them all at Return of the King. And
Regardless, but Return of the King is the best one, so it deserved them.
one, at the end of the day, on it, I mean, that's debatable, because I know a lot of people prefer Two Towers to Return of the King.
Yeah, I'm definitely not one of those people.
I'm a diehard all three. problem for me. Is like
Yeah.
I can't just do. I can't just
You gotta if
do
you're gonna sit
one.
down, you
Like
gotta watch all three of them. Yeah,
exactly. Like it's
you just
just.
gotta do them all at once, just
But
like you said.
it's reached a point where I've watched them so much because like what those came out almost 20 years. Next year is 20 years for the Fellowship of the Ring.
Wow,
Um,
man,
I've watched it so
really?
much in that time that I was building. I realized this last time I watched. I was building a puzzle and I wasn't watching the movie, but I was watching the movie because
Like, yeah,
I was just looking at the
you
puzzle and
just
I'm
saw
like
it in your head.
I'm like
Yeah,
I know exactly what's happening. I don't even need to watch it anymore because I just have it like memorized. Like, but that's how good they are, and like just as movies, like let alone its adaptations, just as movies.
yeah,
But that's also what bugs me with the Narnia adaptations because it shouldn't be that hard to adapt Narnia. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But it is because they only ever do Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and maybe Silver Chair. Why not just sit down and plan to shoot all 7 movies and release all 7 movies? Why
yeah.
not?
Well, probably because in history, like historically, I don't know how well those films have done.
Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe has always sold well.
I think that one was good, right?
That one's the most popular one. It's the
Yeah,
most well known. But that's the thing is like it's arguably how well did people know Lord of the Rings before it came out?
yeah. That's a good question. I don't know.
Because I
I
mean I
couldn't tell
didn't.
you.
The only reason I know about Lord of the Rings is because the movie was coming out. I wanted to see the movie, and my parents were like, "All right, 10-year-old Ethan, you need to
Read the
read all
book.
the books."
Yeah, you're like sweet.
And I'm like, "Okay, I like to read because I have no friends, and I read all the books."
Nice.
Like it's one of those things of like it's. But before that, I had no idea. I had no clue what Lord of the Rings was. Never heard of it before. I mean,
Yeah.
like again, I was 10 at the time. I didn't hear of most things when I was 10, but like,
Well,
it's
here's a question for you, like kind of based on that. What is the goal of an adaptation? Like, because to me, like if you're talking about like we're and of course we're a film podcast, so we're talking in the realms of films here, right?
yeah.
Like, I think the goal is to still make the best movie possible
At
at
the
the end
end
of
of
the
the day,
day.
yeah, because again, you don't want to just one for one the book because then what's the point of watching the movie if you could just read the book? Same thing for the TV show, right? Like it's the same thing if you adapt a movie into a TV show or vice versa. Well, it's got to be different in some way or another. It's got to be the best piece of media that can be. I mean, that's honestly why half the time I don't bother with book adaptations of movies.
Right.
Like if it was a book first and I read the um if it's a book first and I read the book after watching the movie, that's different. But if it's just the novelization of the movie, yeah, you get some fun extra tidbits here and there, but at the end of the day, that doesn't make the movie any better. It's the same thing as like when people talk about like with Star Wars and if you read the novels and you watch the Clone Wars and Rebels and you watch all these extra things, it makes the movies so much better. And it's like, but that doesn't make the movies good in the first place.
That doesn't change the quality of the films. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're right though. I think at the end of the day, the core of a good adaptation is just to make a good movie.
Well,
However,
and that's kind of what it has to be. Like, and it's a hard thing to balance, and that's why adaptations are way more difficult than people give them credit for.
well, from what I've
Because
from
again, like kind of what you said, like, oh, they should have more things in here. They should have more things in there. But here's the thing: you've already said it. Some things don't adapt well to film. Some things can't be brought into that medium or wouldn't fit well into that medium. And then with the limited amount of time they're telling their story in, they have to pick and choose what to have in there as well. So, like, the ultimate at the end of the day is to make the best film. The biggest failings of adaptations, especially in video games and comic book movies before, the modern comic book movies we have nowadays, right?
yeah,
It was just they didn't make good films. At the end of the day, the films just weren't good. And that's ultimately the problem. They not only did a lot of them ignore the soul of the content they were adapting, they just made poor films. The stories were weak. They were just very general, very shallow. Nowadays,
which ones you
a lot
talking
of
about?
adaptations are better.
Which ones you talking about? I want you to expand. Which comic book movies were bad? Expand this to me.
Like before the modern ones?
Yeah, come on, let's fight. Let's
Batman
fight,
and
man.
Robin was horrendous.
Okay, you can't.
Batman Forever was horrendous.
Batman Forever was on the precipice.
No, it was
Batman and
pretty
Robin
bad.
was
It
just
was
straight up
pretty
a toy
bad.
commercial.
Listen, Tim Burton was good though. Like, I'm not saying
Yeah.
there was no good ones
What
before
about the
the
Superman
fact.
ones, huh? Christopher Reeves as Superman? The first two are gold.
Oh, the original. Yeah.
Yeah. Arguably, it's better than Man of Steel, which me and Prosser
Which is like a
Rewatched.
debatable subject.
It was
A
it was great,
debatable
'cause
subject.
I think it was just last night he was watching it,
Yeah.
and I came in, and I immediately, like, I came in, like, what, near the, like, last third of the movie, and I still just had complaints about it. I'm like, no, this is dumb. What the heck? What about this point? Like, I understand the idea of the codex, and, like, why they need to, like, have the codex to, like, create a new civilization, but, like, man, they all have penises. They all have, like, they all have reproductive organs. Like, why do you need the codex to repopulate your world? And also, there's a dead planet literally right next door. Go and repopulate Mars. Like, you don't
Piss
like,
off.
like it's one of those things of, like, General Zod is also, like, a strategist, or he should be, but in this they just made him, like, a warmonger who just wants to kill everybody. And I felt like that was that to me, and this is where it bugs me as an adaptation of that character, it goes against the heart of what his character is. Right?
Yeah, I think they gave him good, like, not to make this a Man of Steel conversation, but I would argue that they gave Zod all the motivation he needed to be that way. I think at the beginning of the film, you're talking about a strategist who's trying to figure things out and save his world, right? After that fails, after he's captured, after he's put into the Phantom Zone, all he has is rage for these people. That's all that's left. That's all that's left. And how Kal-El escaped at the end of the day, right? And he was put in prison. So to be free of that and to hunt that person down, and not just for, like, they didn't, like, hunt for 2 years and, like, we found him. Like, that was his lifetime of growing up from a baby to a grown-ass man. Like, I think they gave that character enough motivation to have that rage where it's like, nah, we're just killing y'all because he doesn't want us to do it.
Maybe it just didn't translate for me, right? Maybe it's just that part of the character didn't quite connect. Like, it's not even connect, it's just the fact that, like, there's something missing from that adaptation, and maybe it's just, maybe that's why Zod shouldn't be Superman's first villain. Like, I'm not saying Lex should be either necessarily, because Lex Luthor is kind of, well, it's not that he's overdone, it's just the fact that it's like you can only interpret him so many different ways. But, like, that's where I feel like you almost needed to establish Superman and who he was before you threw him against Zod, because there's kind of that dichotomy between the two of them, and especially between his fault. Like, you saw a bit of that with Jor-El and Zod, where they were like, they both wanted to save Krypton, but in two different ways.
Yeah.
But, like, I almost feel like that should have been played with more, and I feel like there even should have been, like, a moment where, like, Clark was, like, actually thinking maybe Zod has a point for, like, a little bit, but pretty well from the get-go, he's like, nope, Zod's wrong. Zod can't be right. And it's like, okay, but you could have played with that a bit more. I also, the more I think about it, I feel like the Superman suit should have been earned. Especially if you're just going to say hang it all to the secret identity thing, because they basically do in that movie. The Clark's identity does not matter in the slightest. Everyone in Smallville knows who he is. The military knows who he is. Lois calls him Clark in front of people. No problem. They show up at his house to visit his mom. Like, his secret identity doesn't matter. So at that point, if you're going to tell that story, which I'm fine with at a point, if that's the interpretation you're going to do, as long as Clark is still Clark, which that's a whole debate on whether he's still Superman, but it's the same thing with the Dark Knight series and Batman, which we'll get into a bit later, because, like, it's debatable if those characters are at the core of those characters. But with that interpretation, to me, if you're going to say hang it all to secret identity anyways, why not make the costume something that you don't get to until the very end? Maybe after you've fought and killed Zod, or maybe just before your final fight with him, right? as opposed to just having that and having that be a part of his identity, especially if your story is about him struggling to find who he is. It just kind of it feels like the costume dictates who he is more than the core of his character does. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I don't necessarily 100% disagree with you. Like
But
I
you
kind
also,
of get where I kind of get where you're coming from, but I also don't 100% agree with you
yeah,
either. Like I'm very much in the middle of that like idea. Like I get kind of where you're coming from,
because like
but for me, like the suit isn't necessarily something that's like, oh, this is who I am now, but it's something. It's an like the suit
well,
represents kind of like the ideal that everything he's striving to be,
think
that everything his father wanted him to be.
it's a reverse Iron Man 3, as opposed to Tony having to learn that he's not just the suit. It's Clark learning who he is, and then he gets the suit, right? Whereas when it comes in the movie, that's when he learns who he is, as in he learns he's from Krypton.
Yeah,
Then he gets
yeah,
the suit, but it's like, but he doesn't learn that he's Superman. He hasn't figured out that he is Superman.
yeah. Like what that all represents.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Like maybe that would have been better. Like because here's the thing.
But then you could
at
have
the
stretched that out to like multiple films, because even at the end of this film, you could argue he's still not 100% sure where he stands in all these
But
things.
that's where I think he should have been. By the end of it, he should have been, and like killing Zod would have been like a great final point of like, yes, this is who I am. Apparently, there's an alternate cut where he didn't kill Zod. I saw someone talk about that. And I'm like, okay, what the heck? What's with all these alternate cuts? What's
That wouldn't
going
even
on?
make sense though.
I
That
know,
wouldn't even
right?
make sense in the story. So I don't even know.
But I think,
I highly doubt
oh,
that exists.
also on a whole side note, that has nothing to do with like it has to do with Man of Steel, but it's more to do with like Batman v Superman shouldn't have had Batman. It should have just been a movie that was just the trial of Superman, and that's just a whole other side thing. I don't want this just to become our DC comics.
Well, it should have been a Superman sequel at the end
Yeah,
of the day.
but
Not
like
yeah.
to me, at the end of the day, what that says with the suit and everything like that, that just kind of, again, it makes it more about the character. And at the end of the day, I don't think Man of Steel is a bad movie. As much as I think I've said it's a bad movie in previous episodes and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I
You
think,
bastard.
number one, it isn't. So it isn't the worst DC movie by far. We all know it isn't.
No.
But I think it's still got some things holding it back that are keeping it from being a great movie. And like I think that's kind of
Well,
my
yeah,
stance
like-
on it. Like there are
like-
things about the story and things about the characters that could have been flushed out more, that could have been built on more. And like it's tricky because like the way that they talk, it sounds like they were planning to have Man of Steel 2 happen all the time. Like it plans like they were planning to have a series built on this. But the way the movie plays out, it's almost like they were just planning for this to be its own one movie. Cuz you kind of have everything resolved by the end.
Yeah, to a certain degree, but like at the end of every movie, you have to have a close, right? Like you have to have some sort of like resolution or not
Mhm.
resolution. Is it resolution?
Yeah, it's resolution. It is.
Okay.
I'm just like, that's where.
You got to have some sort of ending and closing to everything. So like that's okay.
But it
But
just
no,
feels
I
like
would
there's almost
100%
like a,
believe there was a plan for a whole trilogy. But then they're like, we got to catch up to the MCU. We don't got time for this shit.
and that I think was their biggest.
That was the
misstep.
problem. Yeah, that was the issue.
One of the I think we can agree with any kind. It's funny because we say that they rushed, but it still took what it was 2016 when Batman v Superman came out.
Yeah.
So like that's still like 3 years in between for your next. I don't know, but that's not a bad. That's not a bad, especially when you're planning.
No,
out
that's
a universe,
pretty good.
Like,
Yeah.
but when you're planning
That's
out a
pretty
whole
decent.
series, that's really really fast. That's really quick.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, man. Like it something about that adaptation of Superman just doesn't quite feel like Superman, which is a shame because Henry Cavill is amazing as Superman.
And I think he would honestly. I think given the chance, he would just people would love him. And I think if he actually got another movie to himself, it would change how a lot of people feel about Man of Steel. Like if we got a true sequel, like a true spiritual sequel to Man of Steel, like the continuation of that, even though they've already done that somewhat throughout the Justice League and the Batman v Superman, right?
I just
They
want a
kind
movie
of
where I can.
completed that arc, but it was in a really like not clean or well done way.
But at this point, I'd just be cool having a movie of Superman doing Superman things. and have Henry Cavill play that. Like it's doesn't need to be
And
necessarily
I think
high
that's
drama.
where
Like
they are. But
one, I know Affleck's apparently coming back for an HBO series for his Batman. I'm kind of confused on how that's going, but apparently that's a thing. So maybe we'll get Henry Cavill back. Here's
hopefully,
hoping.
fingers crossed. He's a fantastic actor. I know we talked about this last week too, so I don't want to like spend too much time to it. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you're talking about Man of Steel, like for me, it's a great film. At the end of the day, like I really, really enjoy this film, and I think it's completely underrated. I think there's so many character moments and nuances to it that just kind of slip under the radar for what most people are wanting and looking for in a Superman film. So this is kind of where whether it's a good adaptation or not kind of becomes like subjective, right? And like it's its status as an adaptation kind of affects how good of a movie it is. Like for you, it's not a great adaptation of Superman, so that affects your level of affection to the film.
What if someone
So
who
it's
wasn't a
kind of
fan
like
of
a
Superman necessarily?
and just going in and they're like, wow, this was a great movie full of character moments and depth and all these different things. So it depends kind of what you're looking for as well.
Well, because for me, a lot of the great
But the
character
adaptation
moments,
plays a part to it.
like a lot of the character moments that happened, for me at least, were good Superman character moments.
And that's the thing, but
work
they
in
were
like
they were human moments, and that's like from where I'm coming from. I'm like I love those moments where we get to see humanity, where we get to see like people. And I'm not a huge fan of Superman coming in, so like that's where I'm coming from, my viewpoint. I'm not like Superman has to be this, this, and this. I'm like he's got to fly, he's got to be super strong, and he's got to wreck shit. Done. Like I'm happy with that. Like you know
Matt,
what I
that
mean?
makes
Like
me so mad on so many.
I know. Look at this guy. He's like, I'm gonna freaking murder you. But
I will
Superman
fly
was
down to
never.
Saskatoon and I will.
Superman was never my like favorite super character because at the end of the day he was like so OP, and like that's I think as an adaptation that makes him very difficult to create films
It's
for,
still
specifically to create video games for because he's so OP and why we've never had a really good one. Um, but they made him relatable through his characters, through his humanity. Even though he's from a different planet, obviously he's not
But
human, but through his
but no,
humanity.
that's what he should be relatable through. That's what he should because again, it's not Superman that you relate to, it's Clark Kent.
Right.
And the problem that I had with a lot of what happened with the Kents is it was a lot of very the Kents are a very all American good old boy family
Well,
family kind
isn't
of
that
thing.
what
Like
they're
they're
supposed to be though?
but then in Man of Steel, they're not that. They're a lot they all seem very everyone seems very broody and very like upset and confused. Whereas like
No, I think they're still that family. I
I
100% still think they're that family. I
I
just
think I
think they
need
had
to
an alien fall out of the sky and now they gotta look after him.
maybe I need to watch the first maybe I need to watch the first half of Man of Steel and just see those relationships because again like
Like, look
I
at the
don't
relationship between Clark and old Papa Kent there. Like,
see but
it's so good. It's so
I've seen
good.
better interpretations of that.
You are my son. Like,
Like
oh man.
the one like honestly and it's TV so it's I guess a bit different but like Smallville's interpretation of the Clark Kent story was done super well over 10 seasons. And
Yeah, over a considerable amount of time.
there are some terrible moments in Smallville. Like it's not all great. Like it gets rough sometimes. But like one place it never gets rough is Jonathan Kent in that series is almost untouchable. Like he's amazing through and through.
And then too at the same time, right? Like, and that's kind of where this is again. We're getting into like the what makes adaptations good, what makes them bad. Like, it's just the greatest challenges of it because you're trying to adapt something where people already have this general idea of this character, whether it's through seasons on TV, whether it's through decades and decades of comic books.
Yep.
You have to cram that character into like, let's assume, especially we're talking about Papa Ken, he ain't the whole movie, so you gotta cram him into like a good 10 minutes of screen time and make him feel like the same, make him feel at least recognizable or have those like base traits or however you want to interpret him in that way.
There's
Which
nothing
is
saying
very,
that
very difficult.
there's nothing saying you couldn't have Pa Kent through a whole movie.
No, and you
Actually,
could, but that's just not the story
like
they told with this one, right?
on a complete side pitch of like just this is a side pitch of like a Superman movie. I'm not saying Man of Steel because I don't think it would have worked for the story that they were trying to tell. Like, could you imagine a Superman origin story where you have Pa Kent and he's basically there for the entire movie, and then you get to Superman doing Superman things, and at the very end he gets a phone call from his mom being like, "So while you were doing your Superman stuff, your dad had a heart attack and died." And then basically Superman has this big crisis where it's like, if I wasn't doing my superhero stuff, if I was just back on the farm, maybe I could have saved my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's things like that.
That's
Like,
fair. No, that would be a very
that'd
fair.
be
I think. Yeah.
one again. It to me, it calls into the whole, especially when you have Superman always being compared to being a god, essentially like that.
Yeah.
And then you can even have that in the movie where you just people are like consistently being like, "Oh man, like he's basically our god" and all this kind of stuff. But then like at the end, you see like we as the audience see that no, he can't stop everything. Something as simple as like a his parent dying of natural causes, like he couldn't stop that. Like, and that I think would just be an excellent 1-2 punch for a Superman story. And that's the kind of stuff I want to see from adaptations is good heart to things, and I didn't
Yeah.
get that Man of Steel. Just to,
But
but,
yeah, like
but
it
again,
just
you
and
did though.
yeah,
like,
I did. I thought it was just.
But I think you hit the nail.
Great.
Dude, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said like your problem is you're trying to appease the fan base as well as
Regular
fans,
movie viewers, yeah.
right? And I think you're right. I think that's where it gets really really complex.
And that's exactly it. Because at the end of the day, let's be serious. Like, we love comic book movies, we love superheroes, we love video games and all those types of things. Like, we're really into this. But the vast majority of moviegoers are not. The vast majority of moviegoers are not super into movies like we are. They just want to go see a film, have a good time, hear a story, see some shit blow up, and go home. Like, that is the vast majority. So you gotta make it appealing to not only, like, yes, again, the fans, but remember, the fans are, like, ultimately at the end of the day a pretty small percentage compared to the vast majority of people who go to see films,
especially depending on what you're adapting to, because there are some some that have a massive following. Again, it's like, again, it doesn't really fall under adaptations, but like adapting Star Wars or doing a different story in the Star Wars universe, you're going to have a massive audience because that Star Wars is ingrained into our culture now.
Yeah.
That is something that, like, that is what it is. But then if you, I'm trying to think of something that, like, has something that's a very niche, very, very niche audience. I am blanking. I am
50 Shades of Grey.
No, that's because that they made bank. They made a lot of money, but for the wrong reasons. If you, well, I mean, actually, no. Let's look at even like there's a lot of Stephen King fans, but I'd say that the Stephen King fans who went and saw it was a lot smaller of an audience than people who went and saw Star Wars.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Like,
yeah.
So you're gonna have a different audience there.
Yeah, like there's so many different things you have to consider and balance out. And that's why adaptations are so difficult, especially going to film. Because it doesn't matter what you're adapting, generally you're losing time. You're losing storytelling time, and you got to tell it in a more efficient or completely adjust it to make sense for the medium you're working in.
Unless you're moving it to a TV show, right?
Exactly.
Well, even then, TV show, you're still losing.
Yeah, there's definitely limits to TV shows as well. But like other than like the budget, when you take things out of movies and adapt them into TV shows or adapt them into books or comic books or video games, they often adapt better than the other way around.
Yeah.
Not all the time though, because there's some really bad video game adaptations of movies, but that's not necessarily the medium's fault.
You
that's
can tell that's a last
trying to
minute,
cash
like,
cow kind of last minute like pulled together thing. But when you take a studio or a developer and you give them like, we want you to make a video game version of this film, and you give them the time and they're a really passionate group, it's more or less likely going to be considerably better probably than the film, or at least received better. Maybe I should say that.
Yeah.
Even you look at like the Lego Star Wars and stuff, like those games are wonderful, but they're adaptations of the movies, and no one's like, God, they should have had this part. Like, everyone you just have fun with it, because in video games you can put in so many Easter eggs and little things that pay homage to the original content that you just can't do when you're coming from a comic book to a film. You can put like Easter eggs and those types of things in them, but you have to pick and choose, right? Like you can't just directly adapt. It doesn't necessarily always work out
When I
best.
think even there's even dangers when you go from book to TV show too, because like going from comic to TV show, like let's talk about The Walking Dead briefly. I don't. Did you ever watch The Walking Dead or not really?
I didn't know. I know everyone really
So
loved it for like the first 5 seasons, and everyone was like, "This sucks."
so I've
I never
watched
got into it.
it up to I think halfway through season 8. And it's not bad, but then I so here's the thing is it's not bad, but then I read the comics and the comics are great.
Yeah.
They are so good, and the problem is the comics pacing is so consistent
Hmm.
and great, whereas the TV show's pacing is really not. Especially in the later seasons, it's
Yeah.
starts to just really it's not consistent. And the problem too is like
And pacing's another thing to balance out too. Yeah.
well it's
Yeah.
we noticed this while watching Game of Thrones before the whole debacle with Game of Thrones happened. Uh, we noticed that Game of Thrones in an episode you'd bounce between 3 or 4 different characters, and you get a tidbit of each of their story throughout, and that would help kind of further everything along at the same pace.
Right.
Walking Dead, a lot of the episodes we were watching wasn't bouncing between different characters. They just stay with 1 or 2 characters for an entire almost hour-long episode.
Yeah.
And then the next episode, you'd be back with a different character at the same place that you were for.
Like an episode back or
Yeah.
2 episodes back. So it
Yeah,
was like hard
and-
stops and no momentum going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of just like the pacing just wasn't there, and like it's still good, well acted and well directed and stuff like that, but just something about the pacing was off.
No, I hear you.
So, do you think everything should be open for adaptation? Like,
What do you mean by everything?
is there anything? I guess the next 2 questions I have are kind of one and the same.
Sure.
Is everything? Do you think there's anything that can't be adapted, or do you think everything could be adapted?
I think everything at the end of the day, it's all intellectual properties, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's all thoughts, it's all stories, it's all ideas. At the end of the day, anything can be adapted. Whether it should or not is up for debate. And into
that's
what
kinda-
medium, I think, is another question that you want to ask too.
And that's kind of what my main question is. Like, should everything be able to be adapted, or are there some things we should leave alone? Like, what's something to you that you've read or played or anything like that that you think should not be adapted or should not be touched?
I don't know if I hold anything like that high. I don't know if I hold anything that high. That's a tough one. That's a tough one because here's my thing at the end of the day. I thought Lego Movie was going to be stupid as hell.
Yeah.
How do you make an adaptation from toy blocks that kids play with that you build stuff? How do you do that? Well, it's not technically an adaptation from a Rin product. You're still taking like something that exists somewhere else and like making a film about it.
No, and I agree.
But
with
it was
that one.
but it was great. But it was great. So for me to say like, no, you shouldn't do this, like I don't know what their idea is. Like I don't
Because
know
you
what
can
would
always-
come out of it.
You can always make a bad idea better, I feel.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make a bad idea worse.
Well, you should let me try because I'm sure I can pull it off.
I'm just
I can
trying.
handle that
Maybe
for
I'm
you.
trying to think of like shows we grew up with. That, like looking back at it's like, wow, that was a bad show. But like honestly, like you could probably make any bad shows better if you actually
Right.
put thought and effort into it. Oh, this man, I thought I had an answer for this, but like I don't. Like the closest I can think of for me is Uncharted, but they're making it, so like I can't. I guess I just have to wait and see.
Well, you're losing there, yeah.
Yeah, but like
But here's the thing too, like here's the thing. Even if the adaptation is terrible, like just horrendous, you still have the original IP, video game,
100%.
movie, book where it came from. So really, you're not losing anything. You're just taking a chance to gain something.
well, it's World War Z, right? Like it's they completely butchered that
Right.
adaptation. Like
But you still have the book, and you can
Oh, yeah,
completely ignore that the film exists.
well, it's really easy to do when the like again the film has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah.
at all. Like, I don't think they reference half the events that happen in the book. So it's like literally, it just has the same title. And I hate that. That's what I hate, when the concept is completely new, but they just slap an old title on to be like, hey, look, it's the same property. The same thing happened with Child's Play, actually. Like the newest Chucky movie.
I haven't seen that. No.
Anyone who's seen it is like, it wasn't a Chucky movie. It was a different movie about an AI that goes rogue.
With
And
the Chucky skin.
yeah, and then they just called it Child's Play just because money. Like, I guarantee you that's what it was. They came with a different script. And they're like, well, we're gonna design it to make it look like Chucky, and we're just gonna call it Child's Play. It'll be a new thing. And that
It'll be
happens
a new
all
thing.
it happens all the time, man. It happens like the newest Invisible Man. Like, at the core, yes, the guy's invisible, but he wears a suit as opposed to like being a scientist and wearing like and doing like a chemical injection.
Right.
Whereas if you look at the movie Hollow Man, that's more of an adaptation of Invisible Man, but it's got a completely different title because they just picked a different title for it, as opposed to just
Yeah.
trying to capitalize on the Invisible Man, because that's what's going to draw people to the to the theaters.
Mhm.
It's like, oh yeah, like, I love the Invisible Man, and that's my favorite movie. I'm gonna go and see this movie now. But like, that's, I don't know, man. It's a practice that bugs me when they do this fake adaptation thing where it's like, or a fake remake, any kind of thing like that, where they take a property, they slap a popular name on it, and they say, hey, look at us, we're great. It's
But is that just not an issue maybe you have with the specific adaptation they chose? Because is the man not invisible? Like, maybe it doesn't specifically happen the same way, but isn't that what an adaptation
but
is?
it's the same problem I have with Civil War, because
See, yeah, I figured this would come
I
up eventually. Here we go.
I like Civil War as its own movie.
Yeah.
I don't think it should have been, number one, I don't think it should have been a Captain America movie. I think it should have been an Avengers movie, just hands down.
Well, it's pretty much
It's
Avengers 2.5, yeah.
it really is. And like, to me, it's, they had two movies going on in that film, and it didn't make any sense. Like to me. And like, again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I think it's still one of the good Marvel movies. I mean, let's be honest. We even said this last time. Even at the worst,
They're really
they're
good.
still
They're
good.
really
Like,
quite good films, yeah.
but to me, that wasn't Civil War. Like, and even like the adaptation, and like going with what happened in the adaptation versus what happened in the movie. Like, I mean, not the adaptation. Going what happened in the original comic to what happened with the movie. It wasn't Civil War. Like, it just wasn't, because like, it started out the whole like, we need to register the Avengers, and we need to have them being controlled by the government. That's great, but then it immediately gets swept under the rug by like, we need to catch Bucky. Bucky is the main focus of this whole thing, and then they just kind of like shoehorn Civil War in there just because, and that's what bugs me with it. It didn't need to be Civil War. It should have been, if it was just a Cap movie, it should have been focusing on him trying to track down Bucky, and you didn't need all the other Avengers there. You didn't need a team lineup. You could have just had, it could have just been a personal story between Cap, Bucky, and Iron Man. That's it. You don't, like, what purpose did the other characters have other than to show the divide in the team?
The
Well, I
fight
mean,
start.
but
Well,
you
that's the
already,
whole point, but that is part of the whole grander scheme of the MCU at the end of the day. Like, that movie had a particular place and
but
position to place itself in.
that's one of my problems that I have with the MCU, is when your films are beginning to suffer as individual films for the greater good. That's why I have a problem with Captain Marvel. I wanted to like Captain Marvel, but it was such a service of like, we got guys, we got to set her up for her bit in Endgame. We got to set her up for Endgame, and it's like, okay, but did you need to, or could you have just told like a solid Captain Marvel story? And to me, like, because people complain about Doctor Strange being, oh, it's the same thing as Iron Man. I'd say Captain Marvel falls in that same category too, where it's basically just saying the Iron Man story all over again for this hero. And like, I like I just found that it wasn't as compelling as it could have been, because it was trying to set up plot points for the next one, for the next Avengers movie, rather than being a good movie for herself. And it's the same thing I feel with Civil War.
I totally disagree with you. I like 100% totally disagree with everything you just said. What a waste of time. What a waste. Not my time, your time. Because I'm not swayed in any the slightest amount. The
Well, people
slightest
agree with
amount.
me.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm not saying people don't agree with you. I'm sure some people do agree with you. I would argue necessarily though, when you're talking about the MCU, it's not necessarily some of the films aren't actually most of them aren't actually adaptations. They're adaptations of the characters, and they're not adaptations of the specific
Oh yeah, like and I
stories at the
acknowledge,
end of the day,
I acknowledge that.
right?
I'm talking about like for me, it's kind of it's that
You have
point.
an issue. You have an issue with titles, man. You have an issue
That
with
point, well,
titles.
because the title tells you the title is the most important part of a movie, man. It tells you all about the film.
And it 100% Civil War was the right title to give it.
I
Not only do you
disagree.
harken back and honor the comic book, but again, what was at the heart of the comic book? It was Captain America versus Iron Man. At the end of the day, yes, was there the politics involved in there? Yes. And were there politics involved in the movie? Yes. But at the end of the day, the biggest divide, it wasn't necessarily between all the Avengers. It was the big divide, the war, the battle between the two Avengers. Now,
I mean,
it
I would
did take
argue
a
that the
it did
divide
take
between the
it
Fantastic
did
Four was bigger,
it
but
did. Well, the divide between the Fantastic Four. I don't know what you're
dude,
talking. What are you talking about?
that's what I'm saying. The adaptation of the comic goes into that because like the Fantastic Four is torn apart because the Human Torch gets like beaten, like almost beaten to
Oh yeah.
death.
Okay, you're talking about the comic book. Yeah, but
Yeah,
they don't
that's what
exist
I'm.
in the MCU
But that's
yet.
what I'm. But we're talking about
So
an
you can't.
adaptation. We're talking about
Yes, you're talking
adaptations
about.
here.
We are talking about adaptations, but we're
But
not
that's why I'm
necessarily
saying.
saying stick story beat to
But that's what
beat
I'm
to
saying. If
beat
you're
to
gonna
beat
pick
to
that
beat.
title, you should adapt the story, and you should adapt it better than what it was, rather than trying to shoehorn it. Like again, it should have been its own Avengers movie, and it should have been about how this specific registration act is affecting all of the Avengers. It shouldn't be about, oh well, it's just about Tony and Iron Man fighting it out because those guys have been fighting for years.
Yeah, they've been
Tony,
bitching at each other,
Tony and Cap have been going after each other for years. And like another
and
big thing
this
that
is where it
happens in
all
Civil War,
goes down.
another thing that happens in Civil War is Peter reveals his identity to the entire world. Like that's like that's another big thing
Yeah,
for me. Like it's just there's so much that was missed. There was so much that they wasn't even
but there's
didn't
so
even get
much that.
touched
But
on.
there's so many things they can do. They're lucky they even got Spider Man.
But they could have.
Period.
But the thing is,
Period.
they could. But the thing is, they could have called it anything but Civil War, and it still would have made sense.
No, but at its heart, like, and this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about adaptations, right? I'm not talking about specific plot points. I'm not talking about plot points. And even for calling a Civil War an adaptation is a very loose term
Then why
because
use the
it
title?
honors. They don't. The MCU doesn't just make movies directly like the comic books. They're like, this is the comic book we're making now into a movie. They take the heart, the soul, the idea of the comic, and they create a story that works in their own universe, and they honor what came before. It's just it's
At
an
the end of the
honoring of
day,
things. It's not like a we're recreating
Matt.
shot for shot Civil
Matt,
War for you guys.
I'm about
Have
to burst
fun.
your bubble. I'm gonna burst your bubble, and I'm gonna hurt you like
I
you've never
don't.
been hurt before.
I highly doubt that. I've
Because you
been
know what it is.
been in incredible pain before, so I highly doubt
You
that.
know what it's. You know what it is, Matt. And you can fight me on this all you want, but you know deep down it's true. It's not about honoring anything. It's not about honoring any bit of the story. It's literally about making money. It's a marketing tactic. They knew Civil War was a title that sold really, really, really well. That's why people keep talking about Secret Invasion next, because it's a title. It's a hot button title that they can like pick out specifically. That's why Professor Hulk was in Endgame, is because people kept saying for years, "Can we have Professor Hulk? I want Professor Hulk." That's such like a blip on the Hulk story that like it shouldn't have been in the movie, but it was because fans demanded it, and at the end of the day, they're selling a product, and they
I
need
don't
to
know
sell
how,
it.
but again,
And
I don't 100% agree with that because here's my point. The fans are such a small amount of the movie going audience. The name
at
Civil
this
War
no,
to
but
90% of the movie going audience means jack shit.
but
It means
here's where
jack
you're wrong, Matt.
shit,
I
Ethan.
would
It
agree with
means
you.
jack shit.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you 10 years ago. I would agree with you even 8 years ago. I would agree with you even like 5 years ago is when it came out. When did Civil War come out? Was that 2015 or 16? 16.
2016, yeah.
By the time we reach Civil War, Marvel has become almost as big in popular culture as Star Wars has.
The MCU has.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
The MCU.
But a lot of the MCU fans started looking into comic books. Again,
But again, you're talking about MCU fans, and I'm telling you, the fans are such a low amount of the movie-going audience.
The original title for Civil War was going to be Serpent Society.
Well, Civil War was supposed to be a whole different movie till they got Iron Man on.
Yeah.
It was going to be a whole Captain America, just Bucky thing. It was going to continue on.
Because it would have been better. But instead they had to shoot
I like what they set up. I like what they set up. I like what they did. Here, at the end of the day, though, like, whether you say, oh, it's homage or it's marketing, I honestly could say it's probably a bit of both, because we're talking about Kevin Feige here, right? Like, he's the head of Marvel. He's the head of all things, and he's a huge nerd, man.
Did I tell you the story?
He has a lot of power.
Did you finish Creativity Inc.?
Not yet. I'm still working through it.
How far have you gotten?
Probably like halfway.
Okay. Can I talk a bit about something that you probably haven't reached yet? But
sure, go ahead.
Cool. So I think maybe I mentioned this in the past. Maybe I did. But the heads of Pixar get put in charge of Disney Studios, like Disney Animation.
You should probably mention what Creativity Inc. is first.
Oh, Creativity Inc. is an amazing book that everyone should read. It's by one of the founders of Pixar, and it's all about business, creativity, and leadership, and the journey of building Pixar and all that stuff. It's fantastic. One of the best books that I've read ever.
It is really good.
It really good audiobook too.
Yeah.
So they get brought on to Disney Animation, and they make Princess and the Frog. And now they're going over titles for Princess and the Frog, and they're like, okay, well, remember, this is Disney, and Disney owns Marvel, so it's the same kind of marketing people.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going over titles, and we're like, we're going to call it The Frog and the Princess, or we're going to call it The Frog Princess. And marketing is like, no, under no circumstances do you put princess in this title, because it'll cut out an entire demographic of your audience, because people are going to see Princess Frog, they're going to see the word princess, and they're going to be like, I'm not going to take my son to go see this movie because it has princesses in it. And the guys who are new to Disney Animation are like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. We're going to do it anyway. It's going to be The Princess and the Frog. And then they also released it the same week as Avatar came out.
Oh my god.
And it tanked.
It's actually a really good movie, though.
It's a great movie.
It's a fantastic film, yeah.
It is one of my top Disney movies. I love it so much. But it tanked. It did terrible. Which really wasn't good because they were trying to bring back 2D animation.
Yeah.
So then the next film they make is Tangled. But it's going to be called Rapunzel. That's the original title they're going to go with. And the marketing people are like, don't call it Rapunzel. It's, again, it's that whole thing. If people are going to see a girl's name, they're going to be like, we're not going to take our son to this. We're just going to, take him to something else. Call it something that's gender neutral. And applies to more than one character, because you have two main characters. So why don't we call it Tangled? Because, their lives are entangled with each other and all that kind of stuff. They came up with some BS reason. They released it under Tangled, and they made bank. I think the highest grossing Disney animation movie still.
I don't know.
But
do you think Frozen went Frozen higher?
I don't think it made as much. I don't think Frozen made as much. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. But it made a butt ton of money, and the marketing people weren't technically wrong. As much the guy says in the book, he's like, I don't want to admit that they were right, but they might have been onto something. So at the end of the day, title is 100% a huge thing when it comes to marketing.
It is a big thing, yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, let's look at another let's look at another Versus movie that came out the same year, which was a better title.
v Superman.
Captain America Civil War, or Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice.
Yeah.
Which was a better title?
Civil War, obviously.
And which one did better at the box office?
Civil War, but also Batman v Superman stunk. So
that's the other thing too.
Word of mouth didn't help it later on.
But at the end of the day, that's my main point, is using a title just for the sake of marketing it's effective, and technically it's a good move to do. It just personally bugs me at the
Well,
end of the
yeah,
day.
and like title is a really important thing. Like it has to create intrigue and question. It has to make people want to watch it and figure out what is this whole thing all about. Like titles in marketing is very very important. I don't disagree with you, but I'm not saying they used it just to like lure in like fans and be like, this is the Civil War you've all been waiting for. Like partially, sure. But I think even for a general movie going audience who now knows Iron Man, who now knows Captain America, when you see the title Civil War and you see those two characters on both sides of the posters, you know what's going down
I
and
think,
you're gonna go see that.
but I think
It
that
was like the
coupled
clearest word to wrap up everything that was in
that,
that film.
but I think that coupled um, with the marketing, with the whole Team Cap, Team Iron Man
Iron
thing,
Man, yep.
they really leaned really heavy handed on, hey, it's gonna be about these two fighting, it's gonna be about these two fighting, and then a good chunk of the movie wasn't about that, and then it was, and then it wasn't, and then Baron Zemo, but like, okay, I'm
But then it was. Listen, I'm not saying that the movie like took some definitely weird turns, especially in the third act, right? Like
yeah.
that
Well, it's
was kind of
man,
strange.
you know how upset
But
I was when they're like,
yeah,
and there's other super soldiers, and then it's like he killed them all, and I'm like, what? No, I wanted to see them
and
like,
it was all about like getting Tony there so they could be like, "Look, he killed your mom." So
which
like,
I'm
yeah, there
fine
was
with that.
definitely some weird twists there.
I'm cool with that, but why couldn't we have had an epic fight with the three of them fighting other super soldiers, and then after all of that,
Fight each other.
exhausted Cap and Bucky and Iron Man just like at their wits' end have to kick the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
But
I
also,
mean, their fight was pretty good though. That was a really
oh, like
well
the
done and
two against
choreographed.
one fight, especially
Oh,
when
when
they
they're
like,
throwing the shield back and forth, that was
yeah, and they get up
slick
top.
as hell. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that was good.
Again, at the end of the day, it's not a bad movie. I don't think it's a bad
I think it's
movie.
a great film on the end
It's
of the
just the
day.
title. The title's what bugs me. But like the movie itself, it's still great. I still like watching it.
But I think like at the end of the day, like talk about adaptations. At the end of the day, I think it is I think it is it's not a direct adaptation by any means. No one would ever say Civil War in the MCU and Civil War in the comic books is a direct adaptation.
Well,
Because
that's
again, like you mentioned, it's not like a point for point. It's not even the same story. You know what I mean? Like it has elements, it has the soul, it has parts of it, but it doesn't have like the whole thing. So it's not a direct adaptation, but
well, I
it's
think that's
definitely a
where
spiritual adaptation.
I feel it kind of missed the mark a bit for me, is because I feel like if they would have just waited a bit longer, we could have gotten that adaptation.
But
But
you
then
need
we're
it. You need to split the. You need to split the team.
well,
I think for the
exactly
story
again,
they because obviously at that point they were working on the Infinity story,
yeah,
right? And
with
how
the
those movies would play out. So they're
with
like,
the direction
if
they
we
went,
break
like
them up, this is gonna work. Yeah.
I still stand by it. Should have been just an Avengers film. It shouldn't have been a Cap film. It should have just been
Well,
something
yeah,
to do with
that's
Avengers.
I feel
But
like that's here nor there.
anyone I've talked to has agreed with that and been like, you know what? Yeah, it should have just been called Avengers. It should have just been called. At the end of the day, what I'm really excited for is for Marvel to just drop the Avengers title completely
Hmm.
and just like, because it could have been, honestly, if it was just Marvel Civil War, people would have gone and seen that in droves because it was a
No, for
Marvel
sure they would
movie.
have. Yeah,
Same thing with
yeah.
the Infinity War and Endgame. If they were just
Hmm.
Marvel's Endgame, would have made gangbusters. Like still, that wouldn't have changed anything at this point. Even like
Yeah.
with Star Wars and marketing, they could just release a trailer that says Star Wars and the date. They don't have to release anything about what's happening in the movie. They just Star
Yeah,
Wars
I
date,
know.
and they.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
But I think that's kind of cool. At the end of the day, I think that's pretty dope. But
The strength of brands.
yep. So, what's your favorite adaptation, Matt?
Hmm. That's a good question. That
Do
is
you have an
actually a
answer?
pretty good question. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, so you can go first. You go ahead first, because I'm assuming you have an answer.
Yeah, mine's Ready Player One, and
Right?
that's
You mentioned that. Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So with Ready Player One, the reason why I love that adaptation, the reason why I just love that movie in general, as well as I think I've talked about the whole experience that I've had with Ready Player One, where I read the book or I watched the movie, and Nicole, our mutual friend, had read the book. She heard me talking about the movie on the podcast, and she called me up and said, "Hey, So I heard you really like this. You really like the movie. Have you read the book? And like we got in this conversation, and she's like, I tried watching the movie and I couldn't get into it because it was so different from what
The
the
book
book was.
itself, yeah.
And so I said, no, I haven't. But I then got the audiobook and I listened to it. And honestly, I loved the book. And I still love the movie. Because what we did after that is we got together on like an online video call and watched Ready Player One together.
Oh, nice.
And what we came to the conclusion of is they're completely different stories, but the tone and the soul and the heart of that movie is still there.
Mm-hmm.
That you get two different experiences. And she still liked the book more than the movie, and that's always going to happen. Especially, I think it always happens whenever whatever order you intake the media. That's usually what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I loved it because I just got more Ready Player One. Right, I just got more of that. I got more of that initial story that I fell in love with as a movie.
Right.
And like overall, it's to me it's a solid adaptation because it's not at the core. It's the same story. Excuse me. At the core, it's the same story. It's just slightly different. Right?
Yeah.
It's got some differences, but it still tells the same. It has the same kind of message, and it still.
Is it
has the
different
same
characters and stuff?
They changed
such?
one or two names and some descriptions, but overall, it's I don't know. Both are good though. That's the other problem. Is like regardless of what they changed, both are good.
Yeah.
The movie was good, the book was good, and I just got double the dose of endorphins from loving a thing. Like that's basically what that experience was for me.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any kind of like disappointment reading the book. And even watching the movie, I'm not disappointed from after reading the book.
Right.
So, do you have an answer yet or no?
I don't know, man. There's like it's hard to like pick a favorite thing. Like honestly, at the end of the day, I think like Lord of the Rings has to be my favorite
that's fair.
adaptation at the end of the day. Like at the end, like I haven't seen Ready Player One, so I can't like judge that. But as far as like films that are adaptations, like I would definitely have to go with Lord of the Rings because like while the books have a whole lot of different elements and like parts to them and they're very much more expanded. I'm going through the books right now on an audiobook version, which is actually pretty cool.
Do you need Tom Bombadil? Do you need him in Lord?
We'll see exactly, right? And you don't really need him. And they didn't have him in there and it makes sense. You didn't need him clearly for the story because the movie doesn't feel like there's someone missing at all. But those movies are just fantastic. Like the journey that they go through and the characters and the heart and stuff. And from what I've read so far, like it's still all there. Like, and that was the essential part, right? Like it's the journey that they're going on. It's the world that they're a part of. It's trying to capture that on film. Take it from the book, put it on film. Yeah, and like again, it's something especially with the kind of like fantastical films like Harry Potter hasn't really captured. It hasn't really captured like even the first one, well as great as it was, and we're all like, wow, Harry Potter in the movies. Cool. It still never captured fully those worlds. And as the books got bigger, the films had less and less and less kind of stuff in them.
I can't talk much about Harry Potter because I saw them the opposite. I watched the movies first and then
read the books. Yeah,
I wasn't allowed to read the books.
Yeah,
I wasn't allowed.
I think we talked
about
this too. Yeah,
it's easier to hide watching a movie than it is reading a book. But like the problem that I have is those first two Harry Potter movies. That's the tone that Harry Potter should have from beginning to end. Is this weird mix of Halloween and Christmas, and like they're my November time movies. I always watch the first two, and then I just give up on the rest. But like the first two, just like that. It feels like magic. And so to me, I disagree with you there because I think Harry Potter did capture what
at the
essence
beginning
of those books. And then around the third and fourth one, they just kind of lost it because they became the big Hollywood. Like they were always Hollywood blockbusters because they came out in the summer and all that kind of stuff. But
they just kept getting bigger. Yeah.
And especially by the fourth one, it was all about, hey guys, look what we can do with CGI now.
Look, we grew our hair really long. They all have like really long hair. Like, why?
They all look like me.
Why does everybody have to have Did you all go through COVID too? That's the question.
They always remind me. They remind me of me in high school, where I just like had that really long, shaggy hair for a while.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh man.
But like to me, it just I don't know, man. It just something about it. The magic was lost, and even I guess that's the same problem that I had with Fantastic Beasts. I loved the first one. I really liked the first one, but the second one, the magic just wasn't there.
I haven't seen the second one. I saw the first one though.
It's a
It's
Wizarding
alright,
World
eh?
movie.
Yeah.
It's got wizards and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tune in next week to hear the thrilling conclusion to our Adaptations episode on A Feast of Films with Matt Black and Ethan R. Hill.